Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, come and save us.
Welcome to Crashed, the technology podcast about everything else, whether that be economics, politics, philosophy, ethics, law, education, or wherever technology intersects with the world around us. Today, that means trying to unpack whether a single crypto bro can be responsible for the Bitcoin crash, if music really can be automated, and the overreporting of the reactions to the AI bubble could actually make the bubble popping more likely. I'm Alex Hudson.
And I'm Chris Stokel-Walker. Happy Metaverse Wednesday, Alex. We've had Black Friday. We've had Cyber Monday. I'm declaring this Metaverse Wednesday.
What the fuck is Metaverse Wednesday?
Well, it's the future because you're going to be buying all of your stuff in the metaverse. We're going to resuscitate the metaverse on this podcast and make sure that it is the place that you shop. We had Agentic Tuesday in my own little mind, and now we've got Metaverse Wednesday.
What is this? Just your plan, or is there anything online, or is there anything in the world that means you think that you can make this a true thing?
Well, agentic AI is obviously becoming a big thing, and shopping with agentic AI is a big thing. But if I'm completely honest, Alex, I was looking for something funny to say after my name at the start of the show. So instead, I decided that I would do Metaverse Wednesday.
Look, if Blue Monday can be invented by a travel company, which it was,
right,
and it's never had any basis in fact, this podcast can invent Metaverse Wednesday. I believe in the metaverse wholeheartedly, 100%. It will take over the world eventually, just not as we know it.
It's a flippant comment that will launch 1,000 pictures to editors.
Anyway, we had a huge reaction to the last episode, with most people being positive. And actually, we went a little bit viral with some of the stuff that Maeve was talking about, and we had a strong reaction. Then someone thought to review us with a 1-star on Spotify, saying woke nonsense, or it's the broadcastable version of that. So if you haven't reviewed us on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast, do review us, please. Thank you very much. So our first story is about the UK insulating itself from the big tech bubble, or at least that's what the FT is reporting. Pension funds are cutting their exposure to US equities because of the concentration of the value in the big tech companies and the risk of the AI bubble. So pension schemes looking after more than £200 billion in the UK said they're looking to other regions or adding loss protection. And this is all the Magnificent Seven, or the Big Seven, or whatever you want to call it. So Meta, Amazon, Alphabet, Nvidia, Apple, Microsoft, and Tesla. I don't think Tesla's big enough to be magnificent yet, but that's different. We're not going to spend too long, Chris, on working out the probability of the bubble. You know, if you want to go listen to that, we have done it a couple of episodes ago. But is that real? Are we really scared about investing in those stocks?
So this is interesting because this dovetails with something that I'm writing right now, which is a story for Fast Company trying to ask what happens if the AI bubble does burst and who will be left standing effectively. And so I was looking through the data for this, and it is interesting. The top 5 tech companies combined are valued at more than the Euro Stoxx 50, so the biggest 50 companies in Europe, publicly traded, the UK, India, Japan, and Canada, all combined. So that's 5 companies worth more than basically entire traded market. So in that way, looks like a bit of a bubble, but maybe not.
You know you're going to get told off again. And we got so much shit in the comments for saying that Nvidia was bigger than the entire UK stock, the market cap of the UK, saying it wasn't relevant. It was disgraceful. It was rubbish data. And I had to argue my case over the course of like 3 days with this one guy who was very keenly against this idea that you could compare those two. So make your case.
Well, the case that we should have for comparing this, I am aware that GDP of an entire country versus market cap of a company, they aren't directly comparable. But as we know, because we are both journalists, you have to try and provide analogies for people when you're talking about these astronomically big things. You know, football fields worth of data centers, or baked bean baths worth of water, or whatever it is that you want to think about. These are all. I was
working with somebody the other day, and we were doing the local radio circuit and the local TV circuit, and we had a different football stadium to give the numbers for every different location. We had a suitable one. The only difficult one was in Sheffield when we had to pick between Wednesday and United. That caused a lot of tricky, but you did well.
You need that, right? So we do need those analogies, and I think that actually I understand the criticism of using that comparator of companies versus countries and their GDP. But actually, I think it is a useful one because it has a subliminal message, which is important as well, which is these tech companies are often being run as if they are supranational entities. They literally do span continents in many ways. And the people who run them, the executives, they are often more powerful than the politicians that they visit and in theory are meant to be trying to rein them in. But in terms of that idea of the bubble and whether or not this is significant, something that we should worry about, yes, in favour of that. They are bigger than basically entire markets and entire countries, just 5 of those big companies. But on the other side, arguing against that, because often we're equating this with the dot-com bubble bursting, right? This is the immediate analogy that we go for constantly. There was a really interesting paper by Goldman Sachs in late October that I've relied on a little bit in my reporting. And it suggests that if you look at the P to E earnings, so the price to earnings ratio for the next 2 years ahead, the Magnificent Seven is at kind of 25 times their valuation. Now, when you're talking about like some of the more slightly fluffy AI companies, or the ones that are servicing the AI industry more generally, those valuations at an individual level are way higher. But that 25x is actually around about half of what it was pre-dot-com bubble. So we're not in this phase where things are kind of like astronomically overvalued and things are so frothy. Yet I still do understand why the pensions sort of sector is looking at this and going, this is a little bit kind of too hot for us, particularly given this is what is so vital to people's lives in the aftermath of Rachel Reeves' budget.
So you're happy with the Magnificent Seven. You're happy with including Tesla and that including Nvidia.
Yeah, definitely Nvidia, because Nvidia is basically the most valuable company, full stop, right? The only company in the world that has ever got to 5 trillion. Like, that is saying something. In terms of Tesla, yes, in large part because I think that they represent a sector that is going to be important. So, even if you think that actually they don't quite belong in terms of all the other companies, and you have an opinion on that, and I'll be keen to hear it. I do think that when you're talking about EVs likely being the future, again, perhaps maybe less so now post the budget because of this weird pay per mile thing that's going on that could scupper the rollout of these things, that it is important to have a kind of representative of that sector. And if we're looking at it right now, it's going to be either Tesla, right, or some sort of Chinese OEM that is coming in and making this. But so why are you uncomfortable with Tesla being on that list?
So I think with the traditional big 5, and this was coined in, it was the Gamma, wasn't it? It was Google, Apple, Microsoft.
GAFA at the time.
GAFA.
Google, Apple, Microsoft, Facebook. Google, Apple. Yeah. No, what was there? There must have been, because Microsoft was in there, but Facebook was in there as well. It used to be GAFA at one point, and then Gamma as well.
So those companies had the chance to change industries, and if they did something, the industry would change. And the whole Apple change of the USB was huge. The Apple getting rid of the bigger USB port, that ended up moving things. So it was their influence. And so if Meta changes something, the entire messaging infrastructure changes, the entire social infrastructure changes. Amazon changes shopping, Microsoft changes all the office spaces, and Alphabet changes search. When it comes to Nvidia, if Nvidia falls over, and we've talked about that before, I think the market cap of that valuation means that if it does have a readjustment, the world moves with it. But when it comes to the actual mechanics of what Nvidia is producing, I appreciate they're built into all of these different companies and their supply chains are important. But actually what they're producing, it's not out of whack with a market that means that if they stop producing it, suddenly that changes the way that people consume something. And I think that's become, and with Tesla, I think when you talked about the sort of profit to the PE ratio, all of those things, Tesla is the one that is the highest above that valuation of their actual sales. I think you're closer to this than me.
Well, yeah, it is. I mean, I don't know if it is the highest, but certainly they are the one, if you look at it at a kind of like rational level, their valuation doesn't necessarily seem to match their underlying economics.
And so it's not And again, if Tesla, maybe 5 years ago, Tesla could be in there, because if you were creating an electric car and all of the emerging stuff with electric cars, it was Tesla leading the way. And now with BGD, whatever that company is called.
BYD, yeah, BYD.
BYD, with BYD, I'll pretend that I knew that all along. And with the major car manufacturers coming along for that ride. And you're right that Tesla has changed the industry and it has made electric cars more viable, but now it doesn't have that deciding vote anymore in a way that otherwise it would. With this sort of FT piece, looking through it, it didn't have that much data behind it. It didn't show anything that we didn't already know. It was a nice theory. So what was the headline? The headline was something like...
UK pension funds dump US equities on fears of AI bubble.
So that's confusing, isn't it? I feel like it feels like someone's come up with that headline and then they've tried to backfill it. So the Pensions Policy Institute's June 2025 report, it talks about pension scheme assets explicitly not having any data revealing a significant shift in asset allocation. So that means that there's all talk about people not investing in the Magnificent Seven, but they're still outperforming the market. And there's no significant shift. And if there is a realignment, I think the markets have already kind of bought into that and the pension funds are already ready for that. And it doesn't feel like that piece, or like pensions moving, because pensions are the most risk averse and they're always the more careful in how they move into that, at least with large sums of money. Of course, there are many caveats to that. Let's not be reductive. But if pensions are moving, that is something to take really key notice of. But this FT article doesn't necessarily show that there is much to look at for now.
Yeah, it doesn't. But I think what it does is act as a useful reminder of the situation that we are in, which is even if pension funds aren't necessarily doing anything about it, I think few people would disagree that we are horribly overexposed as a global economy to big tech at the minute. That Magnificent Seven have around about 30, 35, sometimes 37, 38% of the major US stock market. That is all concentrated, that value, in those companies. And then when you look at kind of the way in which pension funds are invested, they often will go for kind of index-linked trackers, all global equities generally. One of the few stats that was in that FT story was that idea of if you're kind of 30 years out from retirement, having your pension in a sort of general index tracker or with a vague mix of how it would be for just pretty much anybody. Not necessarily a particularly aggressive portfolio, not necessarily a particularly cautious portfolio, that you have, sometimes 70 to 80% of your entire investment is in those global equities, and those are dominated, therefore, by those big US tech companies. Understandable, I guess, why people are having cold feet, but yeah, it does feel like maybe this was written, I don't know, maybe a month in advance of what might happen if it does actually happen.
So a safe place you could put your pension money is in cryptocurrency.
Ooh.
I told Chris that it was going to be a bit of a hacky link.
So smooth.
And I thought that was smooth. I thought that was crystal clear between one of the two. It was always said that cryptocurrency was inversely correlational to the markets, but over recent years, actually, they've pretty much been glued together. And it's still here where the more adventurous of the investors are going as a gambler, and they're going back to invest in cryptocurrency. And the reason we're talking about this is that Bitcoin has lost around 25% of its value in just over a month. And particularly crypto bits of the social web are looking to one man and one company for answers. So the so-called Bitcoin evangelist, Michael Saylor, runs a software company called MicroStrategy, which this year was renamed to Strategy, which was probably just to piss off anyone doing search, to research stories for podcasts maybe like this one. Try search for Strategy Company and see what comes out of Google. This has been difficult. So far, so US business, but this company has become a proxy for Bitcoin. So Strategy reportedly owns at least 650,000 Bitcoin, so that's worth around $60 billion. So that could change tomorrow. This means it's the largest corporate holder of Bitcoin, and it's said to be the sixth largest crypto holding entity in the world, though that has been reported widely, but it's difficult to stand up because blockchain, by its very principles, is difficult to trace. So without going into it, Chris, I have so much more to say on this, but does this bloke bear responsibility for the Bitcoin crash. One, we have asked for comment. And two, what is going on with crypto? Because we always keep hearing that it's meant to be this huge, great savior, or pointless. It's an asset class. It's not real. Does this change anything?
On the latter one, I think it doesn't change anything either if you are pro-crypto or anti-crypto, right? Because you have your argument built in here, which is if you're pro-crypto, then you go, well, yeah, this is going to happen. This is the joy of a sort of decentralized financial system where these things do happen. And yes, maybe we have lost, a quarter of our value in the last month, but look at where we bought in. HODL, etc., etc. If you are negative on crypto, I guess you go, well, effectively this is just kind of tracking the broader global economy, the fiat currency economy, which is exactly what crypto says that it's not been able to do, and therefore this isn't ready for prime time at all. What I think is interesting is it's, I don't think it's necessarily Michael Saylor's fault. I think actually it's equally the fault of another kind of big Titanic ego in the world. Probably haven't got right of reply from this person, so apologies for causing us some havoc. But it would be a certain Donald J. Trump, right? He's gone all in on crypto and actually has maybe made it more difficult for those crypto evangelists who want to see this untethered from the traditional financial world to do so, because effectively he's normalizing it. And this is the kind of the awkward growing pains situation I think crypto was always going to have. And by having such a pro crypto president as Donald Trump, it's maybe accelerated that time frame to now where they have to have these difficult conversations, because crypto was always meant to be the replacement for fiat currency. It was always meant to be this thing that would upend traditional finance. But in doing that, it had to kind of take on some of the traditional, slightly more boring routes and actually inherit the problems of that. The fact that Donald Trump is kind of making this such a central part of his White House with his crypto czar and things like that means that you have these really difficult challenges, which is, it's ironic also that Saylor has basically put $1.5 billion into a US dollar reserve to try and hedge against future losses as well.
So this is the story. It's 1.4 billion. It's the reserve to cover the future dividend and interest payments. So the way that they describe this company is that they call themselves a fully operational Bitcoin treasury company. So because crypto is so volatile and because Bitcoin is so volatile, they've had to take this $1.4 billion to protect that. And it was a surprise. And it's a bid. So I was listening to an incredibly dense Bloomberg interview about this. They said it's to create a bulletproof balance sheet and to manage any worries that they would have to sell their Bitcoin if prices continue to fall. So they say it's normal, and it means that they can continue to pay dividends until the price of Bitcoin rises. So it's currently around $90,000, down from highs of $120,000. And for those who don't know Saylor, I'm relatively new to this. A friend of mine, James, put me onto this story, and I've sort of know him vaguely, but I haven't really come across him. His pinned X post is verbatim: Bitcoin is a swarm of cyber hornets serving the goddess of wisdom, feeding on the fire of truth, exponentially growing, ever smarter, faster and stronger behind a wall of encrypted energy. And because of that sort of language, the social media is a frenzy. And they've taken this company and this person as a sort of, not deity, but it's not Musk-like, but it's not a million miles away from this, that crypto rises and falls with what this company is doing and the way that Saylor is being presented in this way. And it's such... And we all know about the crypto rabbit holes that people have really deep down in certain bits of the internet. It's so confusing to hear about, and it's such a confusing story because this company is just a Bitcoin farm. Well, no, it doesn't even farm it; just buys it in.
But what's interesting is that they buy it using debt and equity, and this is what I find particularly interesting about this story is that it echoes a lot of the concerns that people have around AI at the minute. And, so it's fascinating that we're talking about kind of UK pension funds concern around the AI bubble, and then moving on to this. Just this week, Andrew Bailey at the Bank of England was talking about his worries that a lot of AI investments are basically based on debt, right? They are funded through taking on debt in some way, and if one thing falls, then that entire house of cards does start to as well. And so, kind of fascinating that this is also being replicated in this crypto space. I mean, the idea that like there's a messianic leader of crypto is not necessarily new. Maybe Michael Saylor is Satoshi Nakamoto. Did you ask him that when we asked him if he'd come?
We have not. But also, I used to work for Newsweek, and we all know how Newsweek relaunched itself back into the world with outing the creator of Bitcoin, which is still a hot and controversial topic we are not going to engage with here at any point. Let's finish this off. So the questions that we don't have answers to, I was going to ask you about the London Stock Exchange investing £100 million on blockchain. And now they did this years and years ago, and it's finally becoming more and more public. But actually, it seems really sensible to ask that question here. You talk about the Bank of England. Is there, and Mark Carney, who was then the governor of Bank of England, who is now the Prime Minister of Canada, is a big fan of this sort of digital currency and this decentralized not decentralized, but this blockchain currency and building out fiat currencies into this digital space. With that £100 million investment, has anything happened? Is this bet ever going to work? Are we going to see that blockchain currency really be taken on by any country at all, excluding Venezuela and a couple of other ones?
That's worked out so well for both, for Venezuela and for all the others that did it, right? Like, this is the thing. I mean, I imagine not, because people realise that this is a big concern. I mean, the UK government was talking about having a digital currency, right? I don't think that has really necessarily gone anywhere. What is interesting is that governments are kind of having it both ways at the same time. And, it was interesting you talked about how Michael Saylor and Strategy is one of the biggest holders of crypto around the world. People often overlook that actually governments through law enforcement agencies hold quite a lot of crypto as well. Like, and this is what I find really fascinating about it, is there is this kind of like reticence to embrace it officially, to embrace kind of crypto and the idea of digital currencies at a sort of official government level. I think in part because several governments hold not insignificant stocks of usually Bitcoin, but other cryptocurrencies as well, that they've seized from criminals who have been using that to try and get away with either laundering or passing through that money and the proceeds of crime. And they're looking at those wallets and seeing them go up and down just incredibly volatilely in value, and probably going, oh, crikey, I think we actually don't want to dip our toe any further in the water here, because that is just a massive problem. I mean, like, to use the very boring, very trite analogy of kind of politics of, well, let's convert our government's budget into your household budget.
That's what we want on this podcast. We want trite and we want boring. That's what we aspire to.
No, but the very standard comparison that is always made, that politicians get told off for, because UK, not even just UK, government finances more broadly are not directly comparable to household finances. And yet everybody says every politician goes and says, well, what would you do if your household budget was out of kilter? You would take action to try and fix it. And they often get censured by financial authorities for misrepresenting the way that government budgets and things like that work, and the way that government finances work. But think about it that way. Like, would you put all of your money into a digital or cryptocurrency, even if it was kind of linked in some way to a fiat one? I don't know if I would.
I think it will happen through the back door. So a Citi study published in September said that 10% of market turnover will be conducted using digital assets and tokenized securities by 2030. And while that is being reported as being the small percent, that's a huge percentage of market action, but within the next 5 years. And all of the quotes behind it are sort of saying, sometimes it will move quicker, sometimes it will move slower. It's already shifting, and you can see how a fiat currency just becomes slowly tokenized, or there's those trials that start and it's just 1%, 2%, and suddenly you're using a tokenized currency, and it does, the average population member doesn't even know that it's moved from fiat into tokenized. And I think the actual practical differences of that will be, if it's state backed, will be negligible, because the government will still watch over it. It will still be monitored centrally. It will actually provide more control and more monitoring than the sort of promise of blockchain, which is meant to decentralize and allow people to use their money without being watched over. So the difference is a lot less than it otherwise would be. But I think all it will take will be probably the EU to do something around this and build it out as a tokenized system, even if there is centralized control. And then very quickly others will follow. I think your point around Trump's earlier is fair. I think he's an evangelist, but you're not going to see the US dollar switch over, particularly as it's the global standard, anytime soon. But you are going to see currencies which have less history behind it and less sort of market power behind it, where there is experiments. And it will take one of the G7 or even G20 to really move that. And most likely that's probably the EU.
That's interesting. Why do you think the EU would be that entity that would do that?
Because the euro has the least history behind it. If you can invent a currency and you can make 27, I think 28 at the point where it made. Now, how many countries went to the euro straight after?
Oh my gosh, not 28, but
not 28. The Schengen bloc, who all went for the euro. That means that there is that appetite, and that's not outside of living history and to move again, particularly if it's iterative, particularly if it's standard. And the European Central Bank has power and is known to be innovative in a sort of, as much as the central bank can be innovative, it is more forward looking than its more austere traditional counterparts, particularly across, Eastern Asia, North America, those sorts of places. And all you need is another crisis in Greece or another crisis in Italy. And ultimately that looks like an excuse to move people into that new space. Maybe.
I do think it's interesting, though, that we're talking, the reason why we're talking about this is because LSEG, which is the owner of the London Stock Exchange, it's similar to that FT story about pensions, right? Where the whole principle of it is this happening? And it's based on an interview with Darko Hadjukovic, who is the LSEG's head of digital markets infrastructure. There's a very specific question that is asked of LSEG. Could this idea of kind of digital markets investment come to LSEG, this 224-year-old institution? And the response is kind of like almost like a non-committal answer. It says, we'll go where our clients take us, while saying that maybe it's not an immediate area of focus for us. So one of those where it's kind of like, maybe we will do this, maybe we won't. Let's see what happens.
So we've spent the first 30 minutes talking about one story that definitely won't happen.
We tricked you. You're still listening.
Another story that won't happen. And so while I go off and think about another question to ask about the things we don't have answers to, we'll be back after this short break. Welcome back. If you haven't heard of Suno, the AI music company, then you've probably heard about some of the controversy. Valued at around $2.45 billion in a Series C funding round, it makes music production terrifyingly easy, which we're hopefully going to find out in a minute. I told Chris that this is basically us turning into BBC Breakfast, but we'll see. So the Recording Industry Association of America sued Suno in June 2024 on behalf of their plaintiffs and major record labels, so Sony Music Entertainment, Universal Music Group, and Warner Records, accusing it and a similar app called Udio of using copyrighted songs to train its AI tools. It is now partnered with Warner to roll out new features, and while the announcement is a full 1,000 words, there's very little detail about what it means in practice. But what has happened is that the number one country song, Walk My Walk by Breaking Rust, was entirely generated by AI, now just over 7 million streams at the time of recording. I mean, it's a really niche chart, so Billboard's country digital song sales chart, so it's not exactly the top 40 as much as that matters anymore. But this is not the only example. There's a Dutch anti-migrant anthem. There was a so-called art hoax, Velvet Sundown, over the summer, and according to The Guardian reporting, streaming app Deezer estimates that a third of all the songs submitted to the platform every day, so around 50,000, are AI generated. So you can now spend under £5 a month and make 500 automated tracks, rights-free, with all copyright cleared each month. Chris, does this mean you are going to become a pop star?
I could do. I mean, we will find out in a minute whether or not actually this works in the way that we think it would. It's interesting. So I've been I've been covering this space for a little while, and there have long been suspicions around certain artists being solely AI generated. Just people who appeared and then disappeared. And often when I would go to Spotify for comments, suddenly those artists would disappear off the actual app, which I thought was quite telling in its own way. The Velvet Sundown's a really interesting one because they were, I suspect, arguably the first band to really sort of come out and say, well, we are AI generated and so what? But then the people behind it were very puzzling because they sort of courted all of this press interest and then they just didn't reply to lots of people. I tried to talk to them. I know of others that tried to talk to them and they just said, oh yeah, well, we'll get back to you eventually, and never did, which I found quite self-defeating. But yeah, have you heard this this country track? I don't know whether you're a big country music fan.
I listened to 30 seconds for the sake of researching it and at least doing a little bit of deeper dive into it. I mean, it's fine. It is absolutely fine. It is unremarkable.
It's weird. It's just like average, isn't it? So I listened to it on Times Radio a couple of weeks ago on a more successful appearance on Times Radio than the one that I did just earlier before we started recording this, where I was unable to string together sentences. And the hosts there were just kind of like, they had the same reaction as you, Alex. They were like, yeah, sounds like country music. Sounds all right, but not brilliant. So, I mean, like slop, right? This is what we're talking about. It is AI slop.
I still think the biggest thing around AI music, and I've talked about this before, but it's the fact how many big artists, big legacy artists, have just had their catalogs bought by big investors. So if you look at some of the artists that have been bought, and that could be Michael Jackson, that could be Jay-Z to a certain extent, Robbie Williams, Madonna, all of these have done huge deals around who owns their music. And what that suddenly means is that they could, the second they are no longer in control of that copyright, suddenly you see automated Robbie Williams, you see automated who knows what. You see everything happen to make sure that they can keep making music. And all of the fans will lap this up. Like you look at the controversy around some of the things that have been trained on other famous artists' voices. And that's going to become the new norm. And for the moment, so even though we're going to try and make this song, I'm still scared about us getting a risk of a copyright strike because of where the music might have come from. And Suno is absolutely certain that all rights cleared, everything's fine. But it has to learn from somewhere. So has it learned from something that is copyrighted or has it just learned from somewhere else? So I think for full disclosure, I would use this. I'm currently working on a new musical show for early next year and I'm going to use this as part of the production process. So it's going to be interesting. I have not used it yet deliberately. We said that we wouldn't use it before we're doing this example to see if it can work. But I'm excited about what this could be.
Well, should we have a listen? Because I'm intrigued and I want to get your thoughts because you are a musician yourself. And so I'm intrigued as to whether or not you think this is actually valid in terms of its output.
Right. So what song do we want to create? I think it can't be serious. We can't have a serious song. What sort of genre?
What's the most embarrassing band that we can think of here?
I want to see a Steps revival.
Okay, let's do Steps then. Steps were genuinely brilliant. They had 5, 6, 7, 8. They had Tragedy. They had Better Than the Devil You Know. I think I had a Steps album when I was a child, so this would explain it.
Definitely containing the lyric crashed in the chorus. Call the song Crashed about crashing in love with somebody.
You're the musician. I am so out of my depth here that I couldn't even tell you. You just press create anyway. We're not going to wait.
We have just pressed create. I realise that we're now on a podcast. It is created 2 songs called Crashed. We can open song page.
This was alarmingly quick. This was there's no editing in this bit. This was literally like 3 seconds.
Right. Now the thing will be whether or not you can hear it or not. That'll be the not playing yet.
It's maybe thinking about it rather than actually doing it.
So there we go.
Okay.
And we will most likely, we will be playing this song in the background while, for at least, we're going to listen to the whole thing.
My immediate reaction from the first 8 seconds is this is not like Steps.
It's 2025 Steps. It bangs.
Now I'm spinning, can't stand still. You got me climbing every hill. I crash. heels, lost my brakes. This love is real. I crash into your arms. You're the spark, the fire, the alarm. Crashed, and
So
I wanna hear.
I think that it didn't understand what steps is. I think because it mentioned steps in the lyrics, right? And it's not that clever or knowing. Ian H. Watkins, I think, would be disappointed in this. However,
Is that genuinely your feedback from me doing a terrible prompt and saying steps? And in its metadata, it says pop, male and female vocals, alternating verses, dance pop, bright synths, infectious rhythm, group harmonies in the chorus. That's steps.
I don't know. I haven't seen Steps on their reunion tours, so I am unsure if they have new music. But to me, I was expecting something more 90s. However, I mean, like this was worrying, right? I mean, it's good enough that you can. Yeah, it seems indistinguishable. I was on Radio 1 10 days ago, Alex, and I never felt so old in my life of being like, wow, I am not in touch with modern pop music anymore.
Do you want to try the second one? So this, pay my £5 a month, I signed up, and it gives me 2,500 credits. And to create these two songs cost me 10 credits. So I have another 499 songs to go. I think for me, I want to be able to create stems. So stems are like the sort of individual instruments that they've used. And I want to use my original songwriting and I need to augment it. So if you think about the way that Apple already uses Logic Pro, you can already create, there is already an AI function in Logic Pro where you can build out instruments using chord structures, using your structures of the song. So if you've already done stuff, I have written a song, so lyrics and a chord structure, but then from that, it is entirely built out the instruments around it. It was an experiment. I have not published that thing. I believe in analog instruments. I believe in using real instruments, but then if I will be very incredibly transparent about it. But what it does is it allows you more ideas. So the scary thing about this, and I'm going to just turn it into an emo post-punk, but turn this whole thing into a My Chemical Romance. There we go. So change the lyrics. I'm going to type in change the lyrics as necessary, but turn this whole thing into a My Chemical Romance type emo ballad.
What's interesting about this, which I hadn't thought about either, is you had mentioned steps as a kind of inspiration. If you were doing this on like an AI image generator, this would immediately kick in the guardrails and say no. I know you added the word style at the end of My Chemical Romance, but that is interesting to me because this suggests that they're all, I mean, I don't know if My Chemical Romance is represented by Warner, in which case maybe that would be okay, but perhaps not. I'm less certain about that. It also produces some sort of like EP cover for you.
I mean, that is trash, isn't it?
Yeah, that is not so good.
We're going to play 10 seconds of this. I'm not going to send it to you, but it still sounds a lot like Steps. So
Okay. Hey, it doesn't work. We found the flaw in the AI system.
Have I got that wrong?
I don't think so, because it...
Right. My Chemical Romance, type emo ballad with real feeling behind it, powerful kicks, rock. Where is the rock button gone?
This is generative AI. It's constantly changing.
Soaring vocals, progressive rock, a punchy bass line, hard rock, ethereal strings. Let's see what happens with that. I mean, I'm wasting all my credits on this shit, so, I mean, it better be good.
You've spent now, what, 4 pence?
I spent 30 credits. What's that? 30 of... That's 5p. I mean, the album cover, to be honest, that slaps. The album cover is pretty great.
That's a 2010 Killers album cover. So it's for, again, we're doing a podcast. We're so good at this. We're so accomplished. This is a open-ended car which has some sort of neon heart over it and like a firework going on in the background, from what I can tell.
Well, it looks like the car has crashed. The clue's in the title. There you go. You see, it's still loading. Right, are you still going to play yet? No. This is me having to download an MP3. This is the future of AI. Me downloading an MP3 to send to you so we can listen to it at the same time. I mean, for the listeners, it'll be fine because it'll be seamless. But this is where we've become BBC Breakfast, where we're giggling and sending MP3s to each other. Right, are you ready?
This is what's interesting is this is a little bit like a Taylor Swift song sung by My Chemical Romance. It's got the country vibe, so still it's like it's hearing us. It was good, but I'm not convinced that it isn't going to be on like a hard rock covers of Taylor Swift album that you see in like that you used to see at least in a bargain bin in a music shop.
Yeah, but I've been watching too many videos around what this can do, and if you look at whether the stems can split out, you can do it by instrument by instrument. You can edit the lyrics whenever we want to. They will you can reprocess it. It will redo all the lyrics. You can give them more prompts. You can give them more genres. You can build out instruments if you play a single guitar line. So the thing that I was going to do was just make us hum into it and say, just come up with something, and here is a do 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 do, and see what you can come up with that. Because there was a guy just reading out the alphabet who used it, and it came out with an absolute metal banger. Without going to BBC Breakfast, I used for one of my tracks a MIDI piano on my EP, and someone who really knows music could spot that a mile off. Still played the piano. It was just edited in the MIDI format to get a slightly different tone. Don't come for me, but. But the real music, the musical ear can hear that, and so with this, you can still hear it's not real. But for the average audience member, that's just a mediocre pop song.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, how do you feel about that as a musician? Because I'm the average audience member to whom that's a mediocre pop song. To you, this is, I suppose, both very exciting and energizing because it allows you to do stuff, but also absolutely petrifying because you don't have to ever interact with an actual musician ever again.
I think it ups the standard again. I think it means that production, they have to think more innovatively. I think there will be that push around real life experiences. So what is the live experience of this? What is the shared experience with the environment? Take Radiohead. When they're recording, they go in there and they play that song, but Godrich goes away independently and turns that into a record, and then they come back and work out how to do that live. But they're really separate in that process. And in a way, if you spend all your time pushing songwriting into this space, it's like a producer going in and doing it. So I will produce my demos through Logic, and they're sounding 10 times better than they did 5 years ago because of the automations that are possible. And then you go in and you record it, and that's where the real difference maker will be the world's greatest producers and musicians can still add value, but the gap is becoming closer and closer and closer and closer and closer.
But will people do that last step? Because this was the thing that I was intrigued by, and it's interesting hearing you explain a little bit more the production process of this, which is my completely ignorant understanding as an outsider, is that people used to fiddle about on instruments, come up with a song, then go into the recording studio and do it. Over the last 20, 25 years, if not a little bit longer, the initial iteration process of that has been done on computers, right? You kind of, or synths and things like that, right? You just kind of futz about with it, and then you end up with an idea that you then take into the studio.
I don't think this changes that, because the pop song will still require that absolute pristine level of production. But for the most part, so much of the sort of bubblegum pop and the sort of trashier pop has been output like this for years and years and years, where it's just removing the bottlenecks, removing the gatekeepers, and it's allowing more and more people to do certain things. So there's an entire synth line running under one of my songs on the EP that my producer spent all night working on and building, but I couldn't do that. I have no idea how you do that. He's a brilliant man. This just means that I could do that. And so in a way, it moves the bar higher. But to your point around how the studio is used, the way that you record now is you go and you build out a click track, and now that click tracks, so essentially it sort of makes that, it means you have a really set beat to work to, and now you can edit them while you're recording. But for the most part, you know the exact structure of the song when you're going down to record it. And when instruments, you can innovate, but most session musicians will work to sheet music, and that means there's not much innovation in there. And a lot of the best studio musicians don't improvise and don't experiment because they're not. That's what that. I still think some of the best session musicians will improvise, but for the most part, they do not get paid to improvise. They're actively dissuaded from doing so. And so then what's the difference between the session musician doing sheet music? I appreciate there are some great musicians. Don't come for me. But and having this automated system that does it, it becomes really, really blurry and really, really complicated.
You said that the producer is a valuable part of that process in a pre-AI era. Does the producer remain a valuable part of that process when you can just go back and forth with the prompt for a few times?
Yes, but it changes. So whereas the producer would be all the technical exact normalizing and making sure different volumes and different things, that can be automated, but the producer comes in with that. Do this softer, do this more interestingly. Actually, that word doesn't work here. What about this? All of the sort of human elements of it. So my singing is often too loud, not on the record. He fixed it. And that took days of work. And it's that human side of things that still remains. But also, you can have the My Chemical Romance voice person just do it for you. Who needs a singer? You don't need a singer.
That's the problem, though, is you don't need these people.
I think it's one of those problems. It isn't a problem until it is. So I think when we see the first proper number one for an AI artist, and that become, how valuable is the top 40 charts? But once we see a real number one, fully automated, that'll be interesting about who owns that copyright. What does that mean?
Yeah.
What's your view from the outside?
Well, let me put this into a broader context beyond just music. As well as doing my day-to-day journalism, I teach at a university. For my final year students, I was showing them different AI tools and how they can be used in various ways with the elements of journalism, not the finished product by any stretch. And I was just showing them what I thought was really cool. I vibe coded basically a fancy RSS reader that can summarize stories and also can act as like a back and forth that I can converse with to come up with ideas for day 2 stories. And as a work alone, I often struggle to have someone to bounce ideas off. And I thought this was a really cool thing. And the students, a couple of them in particular, about to graduate, 21 or 20 years old, 6 months' time, they'll be out on the job market. They were a little bit underwhelmed. And one of them basically said, well, this is all well and good for you because you've built up a reputation and built up a career. You're kind of at like the middle point of what you're doing. And so you can leverage those advantages for you. But I want that human connection and I need to learn these sorts of things from scratch because I don't have that knowledge. And if I go straight to that aspect of the AI can do it for me, I never will learn that knowledge. And I guess I'm intrigued as to whether or not by having this, it becomes like an accelerant for younger musicians to be able to do things that they couldn't do before, or whether actually they don't learn the basic principles and they don't have that ability to be creative in a way that you are.
So I think the one counteract to that is when I was a kid, when I was maybe 13 or 14, there was music software that came out that was like basically like drag and drop clips of things all in the same key, all in the same time signature, all in the same space. And I thought I was being the most creative person alive because I was making these dance pop bangers, and essentially it was just picking from your 64 different options and moving them into a different space. And that to me was music production. It wasn't. It was, but in the same way, had I had the opportunity at 13, 14 to mess around with this, as long as it's building out, as it seems to be building out, it's building out a studio where stems can happen and you can build out MIDI files and you can actually understand the mechanics of music production. It acts as a gateway into this magnificent, wonderful space where creativity is improved. It just means that the stuff at the bottom will vanish. And also, conversely, if my big prediction for 2026 with the music is that if you look at the folk artists, there is a lot of UK folk and US folk making a comeback for the exact opposite reason. It feels more human. I'm sure if we made a folk song, I'm sure they'd prove us wrong. But the idea of this sort of folksy, underground, independent artist and having the human element of that, and that's what we're going to see more of the divide between the pop side, which is still a business, it's a music business, and the real, you're getting behind a person. You're not necessarily getting behind their output, but you're getting behind them as a human, and you want to follow their story and how their music says, what their music says about who they are.
This is a really interesting episode because I feel like we're not coming up with any answers, and sometimes we're not really discussing stories that are stories in our estimation. But I think nonetheless, it is an important conversation to be having.
But if you want questions that we don't have an answer to, on top of all the other ones that don't have an answer to that we've already asked, we'll be back for them in 1 second. Welcome back. And welcome to the questions that we have no answers to, which is how we end every podcast now that we've finally found a format that sounds interesting. Chris, do you want to go first or shall I go first?
Well, our format has been that you go first. So let's stick to the format. Let's not be rebellious AI music generators and go against our creators.
Why is mobile reception still so terrible in major UK cities?
So I think that this has an answer to it because I've reported on this before. I've done, I think, 5 stories on this in the last 2 years because people keep asking me to do it because I guess it's SEO manna from heaven, right? It's because we have too many big buildings and not enough masts and we're relying on pumping too much data through our devices every single day. I mean, I find it frustrating. So lots of benefits to living out in the sticks, and by out in the sticks I mean Newcastle upon Tyne, so 300 miles north, massive big city, 250,000 people within it, yet for many people this is considered the hinterlands. But because it is not London, I can actually have a reliable mobile phone signal, which means that I can talk to people and also receive data on my device, which when I go down to London I do not have. So that to me seems like a simple answer, but you might come up with some rabbit out of the hat that makes this more complicated.
I just assume, given the amount of effort and marketing budget spent on 99% coverage, perfect coverage, 3 is very certain that it has the best 5G coverage across the UK, and we're not going to get into that here because we haven't given right to reply, so I have no opinion on that one. But I have moved networks because of a difference in coverage, and I would choose to do that again. So the market is there, and the commercial importance of that is there. So it's amazing that it hasn't been fixed, and yet you go into certain areas and your network just vanishes and it just doesn't work anymore. And I think the reason it doesn't have an answer is because if I can get phone signal on the Jubilee line as I can now, why can't I get signal just walking down the street?
There are planning regulations that mean that people do not want masts or there isn't space for masts. Either or, I mean, if you're someone who says that you do not want a mast nearby because of some sort of conspiratorial thinking, then please do read up on legitimate stuff here. But if it's a planning issue, then yeah, okay.
In our planning diary, we're going to talk about low orbit satellites and just how much that changes the game and what Google and SpaceX are now going to fight it out in that space. But that is not one for now. And I think that is the huge market opportunity and the huge solution to this problem. And part of the reason why I asked that question, so we can get into that next week.
Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, come and save us. Right, let me ask you a question then, Alex. Should public sector bodies be allowed to pay ransoms if they are hacked or not?
I think there is no correct answer to that one. I think it is like settling a legal case, right? There is a point at which it becomes better to fight it than it becomes better to pay. But under a certain figure, and I think this is a thing where hackers are really working themselves around about the exact amount to charge so you just get paid and there won't be that international incident. If it is a small amount to make it go away and to make sure your systems are then firmed up for next time, seems like a sensible thing to do. As controversial as that sounds, you never pay ransoms. I think there is a point where it becomes financially unsustainable, but if it acts as a warning sign, it almost becomes this white hat hacking. If you can pay a small ransom and be alerted to the fact that your systems are not robust, then of course that's terrible, of course that's illegal, of course it should be stopped, of course the police need to get involved, all of those things. But your systems, if they are readily that hackable, and generally it comes down to human errors we've talked about, then you need to work at it. It feels like you have a very clear opinion on this, and that's why you asked the question.
Well, not so much. The reason I asked the question isn't necessarily because I have an opinion on it, but it's because the government can't seem to decide what its opinion is on it. So earlier this year, they said they were going to basically say this is going to be not allowed by public bodies. That is going to be forbidden for ones that are involved in national security, major organisations, things like the NHS would not be allowed to pay ransoms. And yet, just this week, in fact, just this day that we're recording it, Dan Jarvis, the impeccably dressed security minister, he always looks like he's just well put together, said that they were now looking at sort of implementing some national security exemptions so that if you're a water company, if you're a hospital, if you're a telecoms group, there might be ways and means in which you can actually decide we are going to pay this to just make the problem go away.
And your view is they should or they shouldn't, or are you being very journalist and careful about it?
Not being journalist and careful, I genuinely don't know. I think there are probably good times and reasons why you would pay a ransom in order to make sure that this problem goes away quickly. The problem, of course, there is the ransom maker might just say, well, actually, I'm a criminal, so why would I give up all this stuff? You've paid me once, so pay me twice. I think I can see the benefits for that, but then I also see the broader, longer-term risks, which is if you are seen as a victim, and we know that these victims lists do go around, then actually it only encourages this sort of behavior again. So this is the rare instance where I think that the government's dilly-dallying on this is not a bad thing. I just think they shouldn't have come out quite so vociferously in favour of you should never pay a ransom as a public body just about a month and a half ago.
And that in an episode where there have been no answers to any of the questions, we've basically just told you things we're like, we don't know really. We have massively overrun. So that is more than enough for today. Crash is an Everything Popular is Wrong production. Follow us on all your favourite podcast platforms. The title music is from Nuffer. Check them out on all the streamers. We're hosted by Acast, assisted by Riverside Studios, and we are published every Thursday morning. If you want to get in touch to say how great we are, absolutely do. If you'd like to review us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever else, absolutely do that now. And you can find me at Alex Huds across TikTok, Instagram, wherever you want, and follow Chris on X at Stokel, and then all of his links to all of the other social platforms can be found there without me having to read out his many different names. Thank you very much, and we will talk to you again next week.